Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm your host, Roland Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome my dad, Ken Martin, to the show. Dad has spent most of his life working in an apple operation. He spent many years running the packing operation at Martin's Family Fruit Farm, but switched a few years ago to managing the apple orchard. In the following conversation, he tells the story of how the family got into apples and the many factors he has to consider when growing apples. I hope that you will enjoy it and learn from his expertise. Welcome, Dad, to Everyday Expertise. Thanks a lot for doing this. How are you today?
I'm good.
Excellent. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to manage an orchard or what it's like to grow apples. So I'm curious, what's your work like currently, or what keeps you busy right now?
Well, all through the growing season, I go to Vienna, which is about hour and 20-minute drive south of us, down close to Port Burwell, Ontario. Pretty well every day. And right now, the main thing that's happening in the orchard is trellis work, which is what we build it's a support system for the trees. And so each year when we do our new planting, then we plant the trees in the spring, and then sometime during the summer we have to get the support system built for those trees. So that is in progress right now, as well as we are just now starting to do some touch-up hand thinning, which is usually a month of July project. If there's any trees that are too heavy with fruit yet, then we go and do hand thinning. So that's another thing that's starting to happen right now.
Gotcha. So you're coordinating those projects? Is that how you're involved in it, or do you directly manage it, or what do you do when you get down to the orchard down in Vienna every day?
I just make sure that everything's running smoothly. I'm not the one that actually, we have managers for different segments of our operation down there, and we have an overall manager, a maintenance manager, the storage manager, the orchard manager who looks after the spraying and that kind of thing, and then we also have a manager for the irrigation and trellis and that kind of thing. So it's I need to help decide what are the priorities right now and what the men should be doing on a particular day, but I don't need to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning to get them going each morning.
Right. Yeah. So how many acres of orchard are you managing down in Vienna? In the Vienna area there?
It's about 650 acres down there, and another 60 acres or so here in the Waterloo area.
Okay. So are you in charge of the making sure the orchard is being managed well here in Waterloo as well, or?
Yes,
okay.
That's right.
What's it like trying to juggle it in two places, or is it small enough here that it's not too bad?
Yeah, most of the time it's not too bad. It can be a little bit frustrating sometimes if some emergency comes up, or when I'm down in Vienna for the day, I usually check on things here before I leave in the morning, and then usually when I get back in the evening, I checking things too. And there's the odd time that the instructions weren't followed.
Right.
And I was gone all day, and so didn't catch on until the end of the day. But for the most part, no, they're quite reliable guys that I have here, and so it works quite well.
Nice, yeah. And what's the apple crop looking like this year? So there's little apples on the trees now at this point everywhere. Is that right?
Yes, they are just at the 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch stage right now.
Are you talking diameter when you
I'm
give a
talking
measurement like that?
diameter,
Yeah.
So, and at harvest time, they are about 2 3/4 to 3 inch size diameter. So they grow an eighth of an inch, between an eighth and a 1/4 inch each week. The crop, you asked how the crop looks this year. I'd say at this point it looks excellent.
Good.
It's all varieties have a decent amount of apples this year. There's some varieties that tend to be every other year, that they have a heavy year one year and then a light year, have kind of an off year. But this year it seems like it's an on year for all of them.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. And we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but it doesn't mean that it's I mean, there still are things that could happen to an apple crop, but that's great to hear that it's looking good so far. I've been helping with the spraying a little bit this year because of some of the regular workers not being able to come up to help with the crop. And I was noticing that are the ambrosia looking a little lighter where I was spraying, or can I not tell things very well from the tractor?
Well, I think the thinner may have worked a little too well.
Oh no. Okay.
On the ambrosia this year.
Okay.
That's one. But sometimes when you think that it worked a little too well at this time of year, then that means it's just right. Because sometimes when it looks just right now, then all of a sudden, in 3 weeks from now, you realize, oh, you really need to do a bunch of hand thinning yet.
Oh yeah, as the apples start to grow, it looks
Yeah.
you see them better, and
Yeah.
it appears that there's a lot more there. Yeah, I had to keep telling myself that because as I was driving through the orchard a couple days ago when I was spraying, I kept thinking, oh, it doesn't look like that many apples on the tree. I'm like, oh no, they're still small. They're gonna get bigger yet. So
I was going to tell you that I think you did a little too good a job of thinning the ambrosia.
okay. Well, I was wondering about that, so that's why I asked. So that's funny. Uh-huh. So, as you know, we're recording this in 2020, so it's been an interesting year as far as dealing with COVID-19 and the worldwide pandemic. And so I was curious if it's been significant enough to talk about. Will it be a year that you remember as far as managing an apple orchard and how that's affected you, or has it been pretty normal a year so far?
No, it's been far from normal. So I've only been doing, this is just my 5th season that I've been full-time in the orchard operations. So I was managing the Waterloo orchard along with my responsibilities. A lot more of my responsibilities were in the packing and marketing. And
Right.
only a little over 4 years ago that I switched to full-time in the orchard management. And so this year's far different from any of the years previously. I've spent a lot more time on a tractor than I ever have for a long time. And one of the things with guys not being able to come So we had 56 guys that were supposed to arrive on March the 18th.
And these are arriving from where?
From Trinidad and Jamaica.
So what's we'll get back to that in a little bit, but what's the purpose of workers coming from outside of Canada?
Because our work is seasonal,
right?
We just cannot hire enough locals to we have a lot of hands-on work with the pruning and harvest.
And it's just for a few months out of the year, basically, instead of a full year-round job.
Right. So the ones that come in March, they're here for 8 months.
Okay.
But even to hire someone for 8 months when you don't have work for them for the winter, then is you lose them and you're starting over and we're in the farming, so it's hard to compete with the high wages in the manufacturing sector, and so we can't pay the same wages as a lot of manufacturing companies can, and so that's another reason why. But a big part of it is it's seasonal work and a lot of hands-on work.
So this year, then, you found out that, or they were the crew that would come in March. They were about to come. Was that?
Yeah, they had all the tickets. They were basically leaving for the airport, so they were flying on the 18th, and it was on the 17th that Canada closed the doors to any of them coming. So a week or 10 days later, then Canada opened it back up, and I had, of these 56, 20 were Jamaicans and 36 were from Trinidad and Tobago. And the Jamaicans arrived on April 1st. But in the meantime, Trinidad had closed their borders.
To letting anyone out.
Right.
Right, okay.
In or out, I think, was
Probably,
basically and they've just been really slow to open back up. But 3 weeks ago, they did announce that they are allowing the workers to come, and it sounds like they're going to arrive next week now, my other 36. So far I've just been dealing with, I've just had the 20 from Jamaica, and we hired a bunch of part-time local help for the pruning. Mm-hmm. We were able to have the early part of the season in March and April. There was a bunch of people in the farming industry that weren't real busy yet and were at least available part-time, and so we had to train a bunch of new people, but I was really impressed with the job that they did, and it really helped us out in the pruning. But that was one thing that was different. We had to train a whole bunch of new people for pruning this year, so that took a lot more oversight than our experienced guys that knew what they were doing.
Right, yeah. Were you directly involved in training in the new people, or?
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
So, my orchard manager down there, he did more of that than I did, but we had like 30 new people that showed up that first week, and so we had to spend quite a bit of time with them the first number of days till we were comfortable that they had kind of the idea of what they were doing.
Could an amateur or a rookie apple tree pruner really hurt a tree? Like, is it really important that they're doing their job well?
It is very important, yes, but they wouldn't kill the tree, but they could greatly affect its fruit producing capability if they're cutting off the wrong kind of branches, And there's some people that catch on to the concept a lot faster than others.
Okay. Yeah, I've helped in a number of different parts of orchard work, like summers when I was in school and things like that. But probably because it's in the spring, and I've been in school most of the time when I would be helping out in the orchard. Pruning something that I never did. So I would have, if you would have hired me this spring to do some pruning, I would have been right there having to learn how to do it and how to figure it out. So
there's also a lot of different styles of pruning and different concepts. Like, so it's, I mean, there's a lot of different methods that can work. And so, it takes a long time to it's not an exact science of every exact branch, and it's sometimes it doesn't make a difference whether you take that branch or this branch, just so long as you take one of them.
Okay. Yep.
And I might take one and you take the other one, and it really didn't make any difference.
Okay. Does it, when you say there's lots of different ways to do it, is it different depending on the variety of apple? That there needs to be a different technique, or will different apple growers have different methods of pruning?
Yeah, some of both. Like, definitely different. There's different methods that a grower decides that he likes a certain method, but then also varieties, they have a little bit different tree structure, and so you have to treat different varieties a little bit different too. But then there's some basic things that are standard for all varieties.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Just before we get into talking about some of how you learned about an orchard and things like that, just a little bit more about you. Do you have any hobbies that you'd like to talk about that are outside of managing an orchard? Anything that you enjoy?
I recently I've taken up walking, so I've really learned to enjoy walking. Do a lot of walking.
So when you say walking, it's more walking than just what you need to get to the places that you're going. It's going out and walking for an enjoyment.
Yeah,
what you mean by that?
That's right.
That's excellent. How much walking do you do in a day?
About 11 kilometers a day is my kind of average.
Okay. So how much do you need to do besides just your regular activity to get to that 11 kilometers?
A lot of times my regular activity would only get me 2 or 3 or 4.
Oh, really? So you're really upping the amount of walking that you do in a day then by doing it as a regular habit.
But yeah, so I mean, my regular activity, I've been getting out of my vehicle more and walking through it's good to do that anyway. You get a closer look at what's happening in the orchard. So I can get some of my extra steps in.
So you're purposely using your job to be able to pick up extra steps and do more walking?
That's right.
Excellent. Yeah. Do you usually get a walk in the evening then too when you're home?
Yeah, almost always in the evening at some point. Go on a nice long walk after supper. So I've been also doing a lot more reading since I'm walking, because I listen to I got into the audiobook thing, so that's been a good combination. That's finally figured out that I can do 2 things at once.
Very nice, yeah. So what have you been reading recently?
I read AD 30 by Ted Decker this week.
Oh, nice.
I've been reading Brendan Sanderson's series, and I just started the 3rd one in the series, Oathbringer, I think it's called.
Very good. So, how would you describe Brandon Sanderson novels?
They're hard to describe. He's a very interesting writer. I wasn't too sure about some of the fantasy to start off with, but I guess after I got done the first one, I was enough sold on it that I read the second one, and now I'm starting the third one. So
Yeah, no, that's great. Because Ricky and I would, I remember over the last couple of years, I think just kind of jokingly telling you that you should try reading these fantasy novels, because it's not something that you would have read even as a child or any point in your reading. That wouldn't have been something you'd picked up, would it have? Would it have been?
no.
Yeah. No. So that's when we convinced you, or when you decided to try it and then liked it. We thought that was great. So. Any other hobbies that you're into right now, or does that take up most of your free time outside of work?
I really enjoy traveling, which isn't happening at all right now.
Right.
And I enjoy golf whenever I get a chance. That's one of my favorite things to do. Golf, I enjoy just about any sport, tennis, whatever.
Do you been getting out to play golf regularly since the courses have opened?
I've been out a few times. I don't know if you call it regularly, but
Yeah. Do you have you not been stopping on your way home from Vienna as much as you did last year?
well, I've done that a number of times now since
Okay.
the course has opened again.
Very good. Okay. So what I'd like to hear a little bit about what your experience was as that got you into apple growing, or I don't know how much of your story you can share or describe, but I'd like to hear a little bit about it. So what was kind of the first things that introduced you to apples, and yeah, maybe a little bit of the story, how it came into the family, and how it's gotten to the large orchards that you're managing today. So I'll let you start describing it, and I'll probably have questions along the way as well.
Yeah, so when I was growing up, it was a hog farm that my dad had, and we had a farrow to finish operation, and we had this little orchard, apple orchard on the farm, an old orchard like pretty well every farm in the area had. But over the course of the years, most of these trees had gotten too old and died off, and so what had been the orchard was down to like 2 apple trees.
Okay. Were these like 100-year-old trees, like those great big trees, or?
I imagine that my great grandfather planted them when he started the farm in the late 1800s,
Okay.
early 1900s. So
Maybe not quite 100 years, but yeah.
They could have been in the late 60s. These trees may have been 50, 60,
Okay.
maybe even up to 70. Or that's why they were dying off, because they were like standard big old apple trees. But we had in the spring of 1970, that year we had I was the second oldest in our family. I had one older brother, but Dad needed help on the farm. He was a pastor, and he needed a full-time hired man, and there was this opportunity to get a foreign exchange agriculture student for a 9 or 10 month segment, and Dad signed up for this, and it was from the country of Yugoslavia at the time. Mm-hmm. And it ended. There was like 10 different farms that had signed up for this program. There was supposed to be 10 guys coming. Well, it ended up that only 4 of the 10 came, but one that was designated for our farm happened to be one of the ones that came, and so we got this young man from Yugoslavia. His name was Branko, and that spring, when he was the year that he was working on our farm there, living with us, and he was much more interested in horticulture than pigs. And he was a very hard worker. He did a very good job with looking after the pig farm, but his real love would have been to work on a farm with fruit trees.
Do you know, had he been studying that in school before he came over? Do you know, or did he have experience with it, or do you know at all what his background was?
I don't know what his background was, but I think most of the other guys that came, like, they went to farms like down in Vineland.
To orchards or vineyards or something. Yeah, okay.
But he happened to end up on a hog farm. But anyway, that spring, Dad had been planning on planting 15 or 20 young apple trees in this old orchard where most of the trees had died off. And when Branko heard about that, then he told Dad that he should be planting his whole farm in apple trees. And, well, he didn't convince Dad to do that, but he did convince Dad to up it to 100 trees that year. And so I still remember that spring. They dug a big hole for each tree and put in a wheelbarrow full of manure to each tree, and these trees that we planted were what you call a semi-dwarf rootstock.
Okay.
So they didn't get big like those old standard trees that they had been replacing, but they're still what we consider a very big tree nowadays for an apple tree.
Would they be like even bigger than what most of the ones on the farm today, or not?
So we have a few semi-dwarf left on the farm, like right out beside the main laneway coming in there on the left-hand side.
Oh, those massive ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They seem really big today anyway.
Those Max and Vistabella there, those are pretty similar to size to what these first trees were that we planted. And
they were obviously very small when you planted them, though.
Yeah.
Or were they the same size as trees you plant now, or were they bigger?
No, they were same size.
Just
as
one
trees
little
you
stick
plant.
that you stick in the ground.
Yeah, maybe a few branches or feathers, we call them. The branches. But no, they would have been just a small tree. But anyway, so that was 1970. So in about 3 or 4 years down the road, then, when those first trees started producing a bit of fruit, then we had it was a little bit too much for us to eat ourselves, and so we had to figure out what to do with them. So I remember that first time we went to farmer's market with 4 bushel of Tideman's red apples. It was an early variety. And
Tideman's red. Never heard of that. Okay.
Similar to the Paula red.
Okay.
But we also had some potatoes. We were growing some potatoes at that time, so we took some potatoes.
Would this have been like 2 or 3 years after you initially planted them?
Yeah, 3 or 4, maybe 4.
4, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because you would have used them yourselves after when they just produce a few in those first couple of years.
Well, yeah, and those first years, you don't really want them producing any apples.
So they grow.
You take all the apples off so they grow, and especially a semi-dwarf tree, you wouldn't expect to get much fruit in the first 5 years. But I remember, like, they sold out in the first hour or so of those 4 bushel, And I don't know, that probably got Dad excited about the possibilities of selling apples. And anyway, so he started going down to Simcoe, to a larger orchard down there, and purchasing some apples wholesale. He'd take his pickup truck and put a couple of 20 bushel bins, and bring them back, and then we'd use that to supplement our apples to make it worthwhile having a market stand every Saturday. And then we started picking up other customers. I remember some of our first customers were, a few local bakeries, maybe like Stone Crock. And we did a run every week to the University of Waterloo and some of the smaller universities there, like St. Jerome's and Conrad Grebel and Renaissance. And just once a week it was for the cafeteria there.
Okay.
So that was one of our first customers, and eventually, like, we picked up one grocery store, Freiburgers in Elmira, and so it kept growing. And then we needed we just had like a little shed, and so we built a new shed that had room for some apple packing equipment. And
so at this point, have you been planting more trees, or is it still just the 100 trees that are supplying these market and the different customers that you've been picking up?
No, that 100 trees got Dad started, and every year after that, every spring after that, we planted more apple trees.
Okay, so like right the next year you were planting more?
Yeah, the next year. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And every year after that, we planted apple trees.
Gotcha.
So now those original trees that we planted are gone, and we've replanted that section of orchard already.
Do you know how old the oldest ones would be that are still on the farm?
Probably about 35 years.
Okay, so that would go back to about 85.
That's right.
So yeah, about 15 years. Okay, so yeah. So at what point was the entire farm planted in orchard then?
Well, we still haven't quite planted the entire farm, but so we were planting here. We bought another farm up the road, so we also planted orchard on that farm. But probably the last orchard we had planted up here was about 16, 17 years ago, except for one 10-acre block that we replanted, which is just about 10 years ago.
Okay.
But most of our planting in recent years has been down in Vienna. So now, like, as our business was growing, we were buying more and more apples from other growers. At one point, then we got an offer to purchase a farm down in the Harrow area. So in the 80s, we bought a farm down there, and then we were also renting a bunch of farms. So for a while, we were farming as much as 350 acres of orchard down in the Harrow area.
So that's down southern, like really southern Ontario?
Yeah. Leamington, Kingsville. So it's along the same lake, the north shore of Lake Erie, just like the orchard that we have in Vienna, but it's further southwest.
Yeah. Do you remember at all, like how that came available, or what made you decide to buy a farm so far away? I mean, 3-hour drive. Is that how far away it is?
Yeah, it's 3 to 3.5. It was down to there. Um, yeah, there's some varieties that do better
Oh, yeah.
closer to the lake. It's maybe a little better apple growing area than what we have right here in Waterloo. And I think Dad had been seeing that, and
Mm-hmm.
it just looked like a opportunity to grow more of our own apples because we were having to buy a little bit more control of our own market if we were growing more of our own apples. If
Right,
you're
yeah.
only buying from other growers and you're so dependent if they choose to sell them to some
Yeah.
other packer, well then you were left sit. And we had, by that time we had been getting more customers, and so we had to ensure that we could provide them for a decent amount of the year to convince them that they should keep buying from us. If you lost them partway through the year, you might not get them back the next year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it was interesting that the business was both the orchard side and packing apples as well. Like it wasn't just packing, and it wasn't just growing apples. It was the two having to feed each other, I guess.
Yeah, so what kept happening is our market kept growing faster than what we produced the apples, and so we always kept buying apples. And even though we farm 700 acres of orchard today, we still have a lot of other growers that we market their fruit for them.
Right. What do you know approximately what percent of all the apples that you pack on the packing line are your own apples that you grow?
I think it's 35 to 40% that we grow.
Gotcha. And then you'll buy in the rest to pack and sell.
Right, and most of those are from dedicated growers that just sell all their apples to us every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so back to just like to hear a little more if you have to say on how the packing operation grew. So you were getting enough customers that it became worth it to have some equipment to pack the apples and distribute them that way. Is that kind of how it's continued to grow?
Yeah, that's right. We started first with a bin dumper that could just dump the bin up onto a return flow belt, and we just packed them by hand off of that. But then, we kept, as we got busier, we kept adding more equipment to make it a little bit more efficient and to wash the fruit before you pack it. And so when you wash it, then you also need a dryer to dry them.
Right.
And then I remember the first sizer we got was just a 2-lane mechanical weight sizer. It would drop the apples a certain weight, but it was just kind of like a spring-loaded scale that when it was heavy enough, then it would drop at that certain spot.
So could you still like designate where it would drop? Like, were there a few different belts that you could drop it off at with that old weight sizer?
Yes.
Okay.
You had like dials that you turned to set the weight.
Oh, okay. Very good.
That when.
And that's a way of sorting the apples by size, then to be able to sell them.
Now that's all done computerized. Solenoids, the weighing.
The weighing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was one of my jobs that I had in the few years that I worked at Martin's Family Fruit Farm was deciding where the apples would go, and I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. So what was your role throughout the years from, I mean, you started with an orchard when you were 5 years old. Were you always heavily involved in every part of the growing process from 10 years old on up, or how did that work for you?
Well, in 10 I was still in school, but yeah, so we would, yeah, Dad taught us the pruning. We would be involved in the pruning, and sometimes, evenings after school or Saturdays, because that was in the spring when we were in school. But as the packing got busier, but in the early parts it was still kind of seasonal. Like, we weren't packing year round.
Okay.
And in those early years, like, we got into strawberries and raspberries and other things. Sweet corn was a big thing for a while that we grew in the summer to keep us busy.
So you were growing all of this stuff in order to sell it at market? Is that right? Rather than just buying it and selling it?
Yeah, we were growing it to sell to the stores that we were supplying with apples.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it helped to keep our employees busy in the summer.
Gotcha. Okay.
When we weren't packing many apples anymore. But as the years went along and we grew and storage facilities got better, we were packing longer and longer into the season till today. Packing is now a year-round thing, and so all this other summer fruit was more of a pain because we were still packing apples and we hardly had time to look after those things properly. And so eventually we got out of all those others, and now we're solely apple growers.
Right. Okay. So sorry, go ahead.
But so I had time when we weren't packing to be involved in other aspects of the orchard management so I was learning a lot of those things in growing up, about what you do in an orchard.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we had orchards in other areas, in Leamington, Dad would have been the one that, was the most regular in going there.
Okay.
But then in the 90s, we had an opportunity to buy a lot of acres of orchard in the Vienna, Port Burwell area. And so for a number of years there, we had orchard in that area down in Leamington and at Waterloo. And then there was a number of years there where Dad was kind of looking after the Vienna orchards, and I was, along with my responsibilities in the packing plant, I was kind of overseeing the Leamington. So I didn't get down there near every day, but kind of once a week or so for a while. During the growing season, I would get down there just to make sure that things were progressing like they should down there. But at a certain point then, we decided we were concentrating on our orchards in Vienna, and it was too far away to manage both properly, and so we sold our farms down in Leamington.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So now that's why you just have the orchards in Vienna and the orchards here.
That's
at
correct,
this point.
yeah.
Yep. So back to in your teen years, were you still hog farmers as well as the orchard was growing?
Yes. So at one point, we contracted out our barn to another guy that was probably about 3 years, so that it was just the pigs were all his thing, and
Okay.
we were just renting the barn to him. But then when he quit, then my younger brother Sandy looked after. It was his job to look after the pigs he did that for a year or two.
Okay.
And then about at that point, we just decided that with the way the apple business was growing, we were getting more and more into packing, and it just wasn't a good mix to have apple packing and pig farming
Right.
on the same farm. And so we sold all the pigs and cleaned out the barn and used it for storage.
Okay. Do you remember what year that was, or approximately what year that was when the last pig left the farm?
I think I can figure out. It was probably about 85.
Okay. So you would have been about 20 by the time that it was solely apples that
Yes,
that were
that's
being
right.
grown here. Okay.
Yeah.
And throughout your teen years, the orchard kept getting bigger and the packing started and then kept getting bigger as well.
Yes, it was growing significantly by that time. And so by the time I got out of school at 16, um, it was pretty busy. I mean, the summers were really busy with doing a lot of trucking because we were doing all this other, we were supplying all these stores, direct store at that time, and we were
Right.
supplying them with all this other produce in the summer direct store. So I did, in those early years, I did a fair bit of truck driving in the summer.
Uh-huh.
But I was kind of responsible for running the packing line. As I remember, it was pretty much right out of school. Whenever we were packing apples, it was kind of my responsibility to kind of be in charge of that.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't remember or realize that you had done that right from the beginning, and then that's basically what you did up until a few years ago when you switched to just focusing 100% on orchard. Is that right?
That's right. So, like, I mean, it varied a fair bit, like what my exact role was. Like, for quite a few years, I was actually physically out there running the line. Or the last 10 years, there was someone else. I was just overseeing,
Right.
helping them with the run schedule and making sure the orders got packed on time and that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't like I needed to be there every minute. Like, I was involved in the growing some too,
Right.
just like
Yeah.
I had said earlier. Like, I was going to Leamington one day a week there for a while.
Mm-hmm. No, I got to work under you for 2 years there after I was out of high school before I went off to college, and so that was enjoyable getting to work with you for a couple years, though I didn't stick with it for for longer than that.
It wasn't because of me, though.
No,
Okay.
I actually enjoyed the entire job. It was just there were other things I wanted to do more. It wasn't that I didn't like it, but it yeah, it was I could have done it, kept doing it. I just it wasn't there was other things I wanted to do more, I guess. Did you ever consider doing other things, or were you always planning to work with apples for your career?
I probably just didn't do a lot of planning. That was what
Right, yeah.
that was what showed up. But there was a significant thing. I think I was probably more interested in the packing end of it and the all the new technology and
Right.
packing and sales, and I was more interested in that than in the actual growing. But in 2001, we took an IFTA trip, an International Fruit Tree Association puts on international trips, and this one was to Europe that summer. And so me and my two brothers and my dad and our wives took this 2-week trip to Europe, and seeing how they grow apples there, and that started getting me really excited about the growing and what
Okay.
some of the possibilities that we had for growing. And I think some of those things and were what helped to shape where our orchard is today as
Okay.
far as.
Fascinating. So you toured orchards? Is that what the trip was focused on?
Yes, and Dad had taken some of these trips earlier than that already, but then this time he gave us the opportunity to go on it too. I think he thought it would help to get us more excited about growing apples.
Well, I guess he was right then.
Yeah.
If you can kind of pick that out as a turning point for getting you more interested in it. So that's interesting that you say that, because I was going to ask you what kind of made the change then. Now that, I mean, when you were younger, you said you enjoyed the packing end of things more. Now you're doing just managing the orchard. So are you at the point now where you prefer that over packing apples? You prefer growing over packing?
Yeah, I mean, the packing, like I said, that's very it hardly ever has a break, and so
Right.
it was more stress year round with that. The apple growing has a lot of stress too, but it has different seasons, and you kind of get a bit of a break in the winter, and so it was a good fit for me. But the main reason that I switched was just because there was a need for one of us to get more, with all the orchard that we were managing. There was need for one of us to get more involved in that because of my dad's age and some health challenges, and it just wasn't feasible for him to be looking after it all by himself anymore.
Right.
It's too important a part of the business. Nothing, if you miss one thing, then it can be a bad year.
Right. Yeah.
And so we just decided, it was basically Kevin and I decided that one of us should get more involved in the orchard, and he actually offered to, but I told him that doesn't really make a lot of sense. He's so busy as the president of the company,
Right.
And I had more experience in the orchard over the years than what he did, and so I offered to do it, and he took me up on it right away, and so that's what I've been doing the last little over 4 years now.
Nice. Have you seen your knowledge and skills increasing or improving in the 4 years that you've been focused on growing apples with full time?
Oh yeah, I mean, the more you're in the orchard, the more you learn, and it's when you're involved in it full time, it's easier to keep exact records of what you do in all areas.
Right. Yeah.
And learn from your past mistakes, and there's still, you're never done learning. Just like we overthinned the ambrosia a little bit this year, and so it was pretty hot right when we were doing the thinning this year, and the thinners often work a little better in the heat, and
I see.
We know that some varieties thin easier than others, but also this year we were looking at it that we can't miss on the area of under thinning, because we weren't sure when we're getting the rest of our help, and it can be a disaster if you leave too many on and don't have enough help to get them all hand thinned off, and so it's not all bad if you overthin just a little bit, because you get better size fruit. And
wow, yeah, I didn't realize that there's little factors like the temperature when you're applying the thinner, or just little factors like that can make a big difference in what your crop looks like in the fall. So I guess there's a lot to learn and keep track of and things like that. Let's switch a little bit, and since we've been mentioning different parts of apple growing, orchard management, and I thought it'd be interesting to go through what a typical year looks like, and maybe just hit some of the key things that people might not realize that are involved with growing orchard or growing apples, getting them from or making the decisions that you have to make at the beginning of the spring to make sure that you have a good apple crop in the fall. So just to start, what time of year do you start getting out to the orchard and making sure that that you're gonna have a good crop in the fall?
So pruning can happen throughout the winter. There's on real young trees, you don't want to do a lot of big cuts if there's a chance of a real cold snap in the next few days.
Oh, that could damage the tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the cold gets into it's a weak spot, and it can actually freeze the tree.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But on mature apple trees, you really can prune about any time in the winter.
Okay, like middle of January, you could
Yeah,
go
like
whack some branches off.
some farmers that have their that do most of the work themselves. Winter is the time when
Right,
they're
yeah.
available, and so they'll get out. But there's some disadvantages because some years you have deep snow and it's really hard
Yeah.
to maneuver if you have snow up to your knees. And so typically, like, a really good time to do it is March and April, to do the pruning. And so because the seasonal worker program that we're involved in is just an 8 month is the maximum that they can be in the country in a year, and we need them till the beginning of November because harvest goes till the first week in November. So it kind of developed from that we would bring them in early March to middle March so that they could for sure stay for the length of harvest. Right. And we found that usually we can get the pruning done in time, even when we start middle of March. So that's kind of what it's become for us, is the pruning starts when our offshore workers arrive. Sometimes a few of our regular guys, we have about 10 guys that are full-time all winter, and they're doing maintenance projects, fixing the equipment, making sure it's ready to go. And there's always bunkhouse maintenance, which is where our seasonal guys say, like, part of that program, we have to supply the housing for them.
Right.
And so there's always a bunch of maintenance to do on that housing to get ready for the next year again, and just different winter projects like that. If they have any spare time, they could always go out and prune, but usually not much pruning happens. A lot done, yeah.
So what's the main goal when pruning? What we talked about it a little bit before, but what are you trying to do when you're pruning, or what would be lacking if you wouldn't prune?
So you need light penetration for good quality fruit. So a big part of pruning is opening up the tree, getting rid of, we call them suckers. They're twigs that grow up the top of the tree, and they grow straight up, and all they end up doing is growing a lot of leaves and blocking the sun from the fruit-bearing branches. And then sometimes you need to remove some of the fruit-bearing branches too, just because there's too many, and you want to keep a open tree. It also helps for disease and insect management if you have a good open tree that the wind can blow through a lot of the disease and insects. If it's really a tight canopy that the sun can't penetrate and the wind can't blow in through or whatever, then, and also the spray, the chemical can't get in there as well then either, and so then it becomes a haven insects or
Oh, yeah.
disease in the middle of the tree.
I never thought about that part of it before. Yeah.
And it's also renewal. Like, so sometimes you're removing old fruiting wood so that younger fruiting wood, because on younger fruiting wood you get the best fruit. It's easier to get good size. So it's a quality thing again, but you need to keep rotating the wood. It just keeps the tree vibrant.
I see. So back to the light part of it. Does the fruit itself need to be receiving sunlight, or is it just the leaves on the fruit bearing branches that need to be hit with light?
No, the fruit itself needs light as well. Yeah. So, I mean, for color, for one thing, but so we didn't talk really about what has changed about managing orchard over the last 40 years.
Yeah. Go ahead there.
But one big thing that's changed is we grow our trees all on a trellis system. So it's the training system. So with those semi-dwarf trees that I talked about earlier, they got pretty big and wide.
Right.
And so they grow a lot of apples, but there's a lot of apples that grow in the center of that tree that that the sunlight can't get to, and so they're probably a poorer color. So if it's a fruit that's supposed to have a red color, those ones in the center of the tree that never see the sunlight, they just will never get much color.
Okay.
And so if you were fine with growing half of your fruit for processing, that's fine. They don't need to have if they're being used for apple juice or applesauce or apple pie, they don't need color. But we're focusing on the fresh market, and so there's certain qualities standards that they have to meet as far as color and quality, no defects. So we're targeting the fresh market for the stores, and so the more fruit that you can grow that gets sun penetration. So when we grow them on trellis, we're keeping a very narrow tree. So there's different training systems. There's what they call a super spindle, where the fruit is almost growing like just on the main trunk of the tree.
Okay, so there's hardly any branches.
Yeah, like no more than like 6 inches or so off of the.
Okay.
And then they plant the trees really close together, just a foot or a foot and a half apart. Where we would grow more like I think it's called a slender spindle. So we're still allowing branches to come out, but no more than like about 2 feet off of the trunk of the tree. Like, you don't let the branches get longer than about 2 feet. And our training system, the system that we've been using, is the trees are 3 feet apart in the row.
Right.
And the rows are 12.5 feet apart. And at that planting, you have 1,162 trees, I think, per acre.
Okay.
Where when we planted those first semi-dwarfs, when in 1970, that would have just been 80 or 100 trees per acre. Okay. But then we had moved to dwarf trees, but still a rootstock that was strong enough to support itself, or at least to support itself with just a stake. Like, you'd put a stake to every tree.
Yeah, I remember those trees with the stake with each one. Yeah.
And so then we were planting those trees like 8 feet apart in the row, and maybe the rows 16 feet wide. And so then that kind of planting, you have 250, 300, maybe 350 trees to an acre. So that was most of the planting that we were doing until 2008. we had done a few samples of trellis trees before that. We have a few up here in Waterloo that were
those are your first ones here.
earlier than that. But then it was in 2008 when we started replanting everything. So we've systematically been pulling out the older orchard in Vienna and replanting with what we call high density.
Mm-hmm.
And on this slender spindle system. And so now we've replanted 550 of those 700 acres. So we just have another 150 or 200 to go. Wow. And then we'll have replanted everything since 2008 down there. So the training system of trees has changed dramatically.
Right.
It does. So I think you get a little higher production per acre, but for sure you get much higher production of fresh market fruit.
The color is way better.
Yeah. Size is better.
Right.
Like you're only growing a bushel to a bushel and a half fruit per tree.
Okay.
Rather than 5, or on those big semi-dwarf trees, maybe you were aiming for more like 8 to 10.
Okay.
And on those big standard trees that I'd hear guys brag about, they picked 40 bushel off of one tree.
I remember we got 30 bushel off the one in front of our house here one time when we did a little family picking. Or close to 30 anyway. I know it was over a bin anyway. So.
And that is actually a dwarf tree, that one in our front yard.
Okay.
But it's a dwarf. It's a fairly vigorous dwarf rootstock, and it
was it allowed to grow?
It had lots of room,
because
it wasn't crowded or anything by other trees around it. So.
Mm-hmm. So I was gonna. You said that it doesn't. It gives you about the same amount of yield on an acre as the old system would have.
It's a little higher. I
so
think.
But
there was like this we were down to 6 or 7 feet apart in the row, and maybe 15, and some of those trees you'd get 5 bushel off of a tree, and so, but still then there was more fruit
in the middle
of that tree, and so,
mm-hmm.
and it's also easier. It's much easier to manage for pruning, like on these trained systems. So I'd say it was easier to train new people to prune on a trellis system.
Okay.
Because you say it shouldn't stick further than this out in the row, and
there's a little more parameters for them to recognize.
Yeah.
Maybe than just the feel of it. Yeah.
And we still let, like, the tree wants to grow to 12 feet, so we're still, like, our trellis systems are built to 12 feet, so the tree wants to grow anyway, and so you still get much better production if you use that full height. If you try and keep it low enough so that you can do all your harvesting and all your work from the ground, well, that's nice that you don't need the ladders, but then you lose a lot of production because the tree wants to grow that tall anyway.
So it'll put its energy into putting the branches up rather than producing fruit, or it's more likely to do that? Is that what you run into if you keep chopping it down?
Yeah, it's hard to keep the vigor down to that, because it wants to grow, and so it's easier to manage it. Plus you get much more production per acre if you're using that.
You're using the 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get trees that are bred to be shorter than 12 feet? Like, are there options there when you?
Yeah, there's lower, like, it's all dwarf rootstock, but in dwarf rootstock there's many different vigors. Like, they're always working at producing different rootstocks, and so you can get some pretty low vigor rootstocks, but but you also, if you get too low vigor, then you might also have a hard time producing the size fruit that you want. And so it's, we're always trying different rootstocks and seeing which, and it's some varieties, like a certain rootstock will work better for Honeycrisp, for example, and maybe another rootstock works better for Ambrosia, because some varieties are more vigorous than others. And so if it's a really vigorous variety, then you need a lower vigor rootstock. And if it's a lower vigor variety, then you need a higher vigor rootstock.
So just since we're talking about rootstock, let's talk a little bit about planting trees and maybe even getting a little bit into, or just talking a little bit about nursery work, that kind of thing. So I'm correct in saying that the root is actually separate from the stalk that produces the variety. Am I saying that correctly? And they have to be grafted together?
Right. So I don't even know much about all the process of producing the root. Mm-hmm. They have different methods of that too. And I know that they've started like doing a tissue culture. So they produce a rootstock through tissue culture, and that, I think that's just taking like a piece of the root and putting it in water. And
we learned a little bit about that in the plant course that I took this past year. So that I don't know much about it either, but that is something that I came across occasionally.
So if you plant an apple seed, you'll get an apple tree, but it won't be the variety. It won't be a specific variety. It'll be a wild variety. And so to get a specific variety, they take scion, it's called. It's just a branch, and they just need like 3 buds or so, 3 or 4 buds. So like if they cut a long one off, they'll cut it into 5 or 6 pieces, and then they'll graft that on to the rootstock.
So they're taking a branch like from a variety like Ambrosia,
right?
And then that they graft onto these rootstock, and then that makes that tree an Ambrosia when it gets planted in an orchard.
That's right.
Okay.
So the nursery that we deal with mostly, like they come out to our orchard and cut a whole bunch of this scion wood.
Oh, they'll take your own varieties to make sure you're getting the same fruit. Okay.
And so in a variety too, there's a whole bunch of different
kind of like strains.
Yeah, strains. That's the word I'm thinking of.
Because I remember when we were packing, you'd be packing Red Delicious or Ambrosia, and you could tell differences in the types of Red Delicious or Ambrosia. So is that because...
So in Gala, for example, we have probably 8 different strains of Gala in our orchard. And you see slight differences in harvest time that they're ready in some color. They're always working, and this is another area that I know very little about as far as how they actually do the breeding to... Like there's creating new varieties.
Right.
So like Empire, for example, was back when I was young, was a new variety that was a cross between Macintosh and Red Delicious. And most new varieties are a cross of 2 varieties that they think would make a good fit, and if they put them together, they'd get an even better variety. But then strains, like that's just improving the genetics of a specific variety. It doesn't it tastes the same, but they can somehow with breeding they can improve the variety so that you get a little bit higher color. So if like Honeycrisp, for example, it was really challenging that one of the challenges of Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp has many challenges, but one of the challenges of Honeycrisp is color, and so they've bred some new varieties now. One is called Premium Honeycrisp, and
that's just tweaking the strain of the variety to try to make it a little more marketable.
Right, so you get higher color on it.
Yeah.
And so Gala has different strains too, higher colored strains and lower colored strains, and Red Delicious do as well. There's huge differences, and they can be striped and they can be solid red. In the same variety, like some people wouldn't believe that it's the same variety. One's very striped and one's even Macintosh. Like Macintosh has a strain that's very striped, but most of them are just more a solid red green. So, but you don't want a strain to be too different than the typical part of
it, or you couldn't sell it.
Confuses people because they're not believing that they're buying what they see.
So going back to the rootstock, is it the rootstock that determines how fast the tree grows, or how quickly the branches grow? Is that what you were meaning by vigor when you were talking about the vigor of a tree?
Yes. Vigor has with how big the tree gets too.
Right.
But if it has too high vigor, then it wants to grow wild, and then you have to cut a bunch of those suckers off cut it back, and then that just tells it to really, like, the more you cut on a tree, then cutting induces vigor, and so so if you have to do too much cutting, then you're always fighting with it because it really grew, and you try and cut it back, and then it just grows all the more, and then it creates a lot of work in pruning, and
does that mean the fruit isn't as nice either?
It can be, because it wants to grow a whole bunch of branches and leaves, and then it blocks the sun again.
Right. Oh yeah.
So that's very important to match the rootstock to the variety so that you get the right vigor, and that's something that we're still learning. But as I watch, so there's a new line of rootstocks, Geneva, that they came up with in New York, just 10 years or so ago, and that's the most common rootstock that we've been planting lately. But I've been discovering that there's some, quirks about these rootstocks, and some of them might thin a little bit easier, and when they're young trees, and just different things like that. So there's all kinds of things to learn about new rootstocks.
It takes a while to find out those things, I guess. With an orchard, you don't know that your first year or two. And
then it's different on different varieties too. Right?
Oh yeah. So if you use the same rootstock for all the varieties, you'll see different.
So another challenge with Honeycrisp is bitter pit. I mentioned one of the challenges is color.
Mm-hmm. What is bitter pit?
Bitter pit is low calcium. It's calcium deficiency.
And what does
it's a black. It develops like as a black spot, but it goes all the way into the core.
So when you'd cut the actual fruit that gets picked, you'd see
this black tunnels right into the core.
Oh, I see.
Whatever.
Okay.
But if you have too high a vigor tree, you tend to get more of that, more of the bitter pit.
Okay. So you have to watch that with the Honeycrisp.
But then Honeycrisp is one of the varieties that doesn't grow. It's a lower vigor variety, and so it's tempting to use the higher vigor so that you get the big tree, but then you have to watch that you don't have too high a vigor that that you get a lot of the bitter pit
Gotcha.
problems.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Were there other things that you wanted to say about how managing an orchard has changed? With you talked about, we were kind of talking about pruning, and we'll get back to moving through the apple season. But were there other things that you'd specifically picked out?
Well, there's one other big change that I think about is the food safety aspect of it. So we're Canada Gap certified on all our orchards, and all the growers that supply apples to us are Canada Gap certified as well. So there's very stringent regulations on chemical use and picking practices, like cleanliness, whatever, in the orchard, and just you have to pass an audit every year that shows that you're meeting these standards. And I think back to when I helped my dad spray apple trees back when I was young. We had this box type sprayer that you could actually sit on the sprayer, and we just had a little orchard then, right?
Right.
But Dad would drive the tractor, and we had these guns, and so he'd run the one gun and spray the trees in the one row, and one of us boys would sit on the back of the sprayer and spray the trees the other row. And we didn't even think anything of wearing protective gear or anything. Most of the spray didn't hit us, but sometimes, the wind was going the right direction, or you turned the corner at the end or whatever, then the spray would hit you. Well, now we spray all in cab tractors, and we use Tower sprayers in all our orchards. So a Tower sprayer is the tower on the back of the sprayer is actually pretty much the height of the tree.
Right.
And so it's just spraying directly sideways into the tree. And these trees aren't near as big and wide as, so that it only has to penetrate, those 3 feet or whatever,
right,
into the tree. And so you can just do a lot better job of getting the chemical right where you want it, and you don't have a lot blowing in the air.
Oh yeah, not as much overspray.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that would cut down too on the amount. Like, doesn't that save chemical in the end too, if you or save resources if you're getting it all where you want it to go?
Yes. So you can use lower rates.
Yeah.
And so we have also been involved in IPM, integrated pest management, where we actually put traps out in the orchard where you trap insects, and then you see when you're catching a certain amount of adults of a particular insect, so you know when the exact prime time is to target those insects with a spray. And so you're not just guessing, oh, it must be about time to spray again. So it's more targeted. So
right. Yeah.
Not takes more of the guesswork out of it. And chemicals, I mean, that's another big change, is a lot of chemicals that were available to us years ago are no longer available because they've been deemed too potent or unsafe or whatever. And so there's very rigorous methods that are used to test any chemicals that we're allowed to use, and we have very rigorous harvest, like dates to harvest that you're not to use it before. And so really when those fruit are harvested, they're very safe. Like I eat apples right out of the orchard, because I know that we've been following practices that are safe, and so there's basically zero residue on those apples when it's time to harvest them. And so I don't have any problem with people washing their fruit. I mean, all the fruit gets washed when it goes to the store because it runs over the packing line and gets washed. But actually, it's safe to use.
Oh yeah.
Eat right
Well,
out of the
I would wash it just because I don't know who's all handled it between
exactly
the packing line
and there can be dirt and whatever on it or whatever.
Yeah.
But
you have you're saying you follow strict regulations in ensuring that there's not pesticide remaining on the fruit when it's picked and that kind of thing.
You can feel very confident that it's a safe, healthy product.
Right. Yeah.
That you're getting.
Going back to when you were younger and you sat on the back of the sprayer and used guns to spray the trees, was it just that you didn't realize what you were doing and some of the safety standards you should have had, or was everyone unaware of maybe some of the safety things they should have been doing?
Well, I think yeah, people were more unaware of potential long-term problems that it could cause, like cancer or those kinds of things. So I don't recommend anybody going back to the way that we did.
Right. Yeah.
Back then. But it is true that the chemical in its pure state is where it's really dangerous. Like once it's been tank mixed with the water, it's way decreased.
You're diluting it quite a bit to put it onto the trees. Yeah.
So you're not getting the full force of it, but it's still wise to avoid contact with that.
Right, yeah. And it might not affect everyone, but even if you're increasing your chance of getting cancer by 30%, then it's probably best not to deal with something that could increase your chances if it is possible to avoid it.
That's right. And so far it's never caused me any problem what I did as a boy back then. But who knows, like it could, I could get cancer at 75 and it might be partly related to something back then. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's not just that. Like, there's so many things that researchers have discovered over the last 30, 40, 50 years that they've realized were harmful, and like whether it's pollution or foods that we eat, and there's been all kinds of regulations that have been put in the last number of years that construction materials, that kind of thing, that's been changed.
As we learn more of these things, it's wise to be more careful with them when we can.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to going through some of the steps that are involved in a season of growing apples. So we hit pruning. You get the pruning done. What's the next thing that an orchard manager needs to take care of?
Well, so the spraying starts as soon as you have any green tissue showing.
So that's just a bud?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as soon as those first buds start to open and you have a little bit of green leaf showing, that's when the spray program has to start. And the reason for that is it's for disease, particularly scab. Scab is one of the biggest issues for growing apples in our climate, because we have a lot of rain and humidity. And scab, if you get scab in an orchard, the scab spores will just overwinter there. Like, scab develops on the leaf.
So this is a fungus, or what is it?
It's a fungus.
Okay, yeah.
Scab is a fungus that develops on the leaf of the apple first, and then it passes from the leaf to the actual fruit, and it becomes like a rough lesion on the fruit. But if you get scab in your orchard, once you get it, it's really hard to get rid of it, because those leaves, when in the winter they just fall on the ground. Well, then they're dormant there until the spring. But if those leaves had scab on them the previous year, then as soon as it starts getting warm and raining in the spring, then those scab spores come up off of those leaves, and they get right on to the new leaves.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That are there. So if you had scab the year before, then it's really high priority that you have covered. But even if you haven't had it the year before, you don't get it quite as easily, but they'll come
You have
in.
to
They'll blow in
protecting
from
it.
somewhere.
Oh yeah, another farm or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's we call it a cover. It's a fungicide for diseases like scab, and another one is powdery mildew.
Okay.
It would be two of the main diseases. And then more in the once you get to the blossom period and after, then is when you need the insecticides for insects like codling moth and oriental fruit moth and apple maggot. They're all those worms that want to tunnel into the apple.
Those are the famous worms in the apple that you see.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does every geography that grows apples deal with that, or are you dealing with different insect pests than other areas of the world are?
No, I mean, there's maybe slightly different ones in different areas or whatever, but apples have more pests than any other
Really?
fruit.
Okay.
That's been said, and so that's one of the reasons apples is a cold climate fruit. Like they're only growing in areas where there's a dormant stage where it actually gets cold enough in the winter, like for them to drop their leaves, and so like there's in the countries close to the equator, apples is
not a tropical fruit.
No, apples can't be growing at all. So then in the southern hemisphere, when you're far enough south that they have their winter at the opposite time of we do, then so like New Zealand and South Africa and Chile, those are some southern hemisphere countries that can grow apples. But a lot of African countries, they're too close to the equator.
Okay, so I'd have to, like, South Africa's basically the main one that's cold enough to grow apples.
Yes.
Okay.
So like there's a lot of European countries that grow apples.
Right. Does Russia?
Russia grows apples.
South Russia.
China in certain areas, like China is a big apple growing.
And then
country.
northern U.S. and southern Canada.
Yeah, like the southern U.S. states, Northern California. Well, Northern California is about the same.
That's about where we are now.
Yeah. So there is some apples grown in Northern California, but Washington is the big apple growing area in the U.S. Washington grows more than all the rest of the states put together.
Okay.
By a significant amount.
Does it grow more than the rest of the world?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Is U.S. the biggest apple producer? Or?
No.
Oh, really? Okay.
China's the biggest apple producer.
I didn't know that yet.
But and some of the Italy and France would be similar to the U.S. in apple production. Germany is another big one in Europe. And then Chile and New Zealand are both big apple producers
Okay.
too.
Is Canada pretty low on that list?
Canada's very low on that list.
Just because there's not many places in Canada where you actually can, because it's too cold most of Canada, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And yeah, like even like in the prairies, there's no. It gets too cold in the winters.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that there's the line. It needs to be cold enough in the winters that you have dormant, but if it's too cold, then it can't get more than about 25 to 30 minus 25 or 30 Celsius. That's about
Okay.
maximum. There is a few like real hardy rootstocks that you could maybe plant that can do a little bit colder than that. Like up in northern Wisconsin where my wife comes from, I know there was some guys who were playing around with trees that were rootstocks that were meant for colder climates.
Okay.
But you can't get much colder than that, and
Okay.
they'll freeze out in the winter.
Yeah. Which province grows the most apples?
Ontario is probably number one most years, but Ontario and BC are really close the same, and Quebec is just close behind too.
Okay.
So those three provinces are all quite similar.
Yeah.
And then Nova Scotia is the other one that has a significant amount of
Okay.
apples. And New Brunswick has a few.
Isn't BC? They'd be quite a bit north of us here in southern Ontario, not?
Yeah, but BC has a moderate climate on the other side of the mountains.
Oh, right. Okay. From the ocean. Okay.
And there's a particularly one valley, the Okanagan Valley, which travels right where all the apples are growing in Washington.
Oh, okay.
That valley kind of travels right north into BC, and that's where a lot of the apples.
So it's
are
kind of the
growing
same geographic area as Washington State, where so many apples are grown.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
gotcha. Hmm. So you were talking about pests that you're dealing with. So you're spraying for those throughout the summer, or is that a specific time in the spring or summer? Or
No, you need to spray. So like for scab and disease, like if you have that under control, into June, about the time of year we are now, then you can really back off on that. If you don't have it under control, then you have to really keep spraying right up
because they
until
keep
harvest.
reproducing, or why is that?
Well, see, if you get the scab on the leaves,
Oh, the scab, right?
then it wants to travel from the leaves to the apples, and so then you have to keep fighting it to try and keep it off of the apples.
Okay.
But if you have good control of it early and you don't get it on the leaves, and then you don't have to keep fighting. I mean, it's much
Right,
easier
you got
to
it under
keep
control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then some of the insects, their prime time is the middle of the summer, and so in the summer it tends to switch from weekly spraying to just every other week, or you might even get as long as 3 weeks sometimes in the later summer.
Mm-hmm. And you're making those decisions depending on just looking at the orchard, or you said you're trapping insects to see what's there, or how many are there? Is that how you make some of those decisions?
Yeah, and weather conditions can make it especially like in the early part of the year, depending how much rainfall you have. That's huge for the scab infection.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be covered every time you have rain, or if you have a lot of rain, it washes it off, and then
I see.
you're not covered for the next time. So if you've sprayed and then a couple of days later you have a rain, well, you were covered for that one, but now you might not be covered for the next one. And
Okay.
So it can depend how much rainfall you have.
Gotcha.
Where out in a climate like Washington, they have very little rainfall. They're growing apples in a more desert climate.
Okay.
But they depend mostly on irrigation. And
but that makes the pest control easier.
Yeah, for the disease control for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
They still have the same pests, those worms like that. They're not
right.
That doesn't have to do with the rain.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, going back to the beginning of the year. So with Blossom, how what's the purpose of bringing in the bees and making sure of the how do you decide when to do that, and how does that work?
Well, bees are very key for pollination in the orchard. Each flower needs to be pollinated in order to produce a fruit, and so wind, wild bees do a lot of pollination, but because we have so much orchard concentrated in one area, it just seems like a smart investment to hire bees to be brought in to help out with the pollination. Some years you might only get one really good day during blossom when when the bees can really work, and
needs to be a nice sunny day.
If you have cool rainy weather during bloom, then it's poor pollination weather, and so you really want as much help as you can get. This year we had like 3 or 4 really, really warm days right during bloom, and so then bloom is really quick from when the flowers open to when the petals fall, when you have hot weather like that during bloom. But the bees had 3 or 4 good days they could work all day every day, and so when you have hot weather like that during bloom, then you tend to have really strong set, really good pollination. I mean, the first thing is that you need the flowers,
right?
Like I had mentioned earlier, some varieties tend to be biennial, where they produce a really heavy crop one year, and then they can be next to nothing the next year. And so one of the orchard management things that we really need to work with is making sure that they get thinned properly early, because that really affects a tree is producing its fruit buds for the next year in June already, June and maybe early part of July.
So right now it's producing the buds for 2021.
That's right.
Okay.
And so if the tree is really loaded and stressed when it's supposed to be producing the fruit buds for the next year, then the tree will tell it to take a rest.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
And some varieties particularly are that way. And so by doing chemical thinning, some guys even do blossom thinning, like they hit the blossoms with a thinner.
Okay.
But by doing that thinning early, then you're taking the stress away from the tree, and you're helping the tree to know that it can produce a normal crop again the next year.
And there'd be no way to do that by hand.
And the later No, and the later those apples, the longer. So if you're depending just on hand thinning to get them all off, then the tree's under stress for a good part of the summer, and
Right. Yeah.
spending all that energy and growing all these fruit that it can't actually hold, and then the tree's too stressed. That can even happen if you don't get the fruit off at the right time. Like some varieties, like Gala, really hold their fruit. Like even though they're ripe, they don't drop. Some as soon as they get ripe, they drop.
Start dropping.
Or Gala, they tend to really hang on. They're a little bit harder apple to pick, and so if you don't get to the Gala in time, then that can affect your crop the next year too. It won't produce because it was holding those apples and stressing out all that extra time. So nutrition is another thing that we do. Like we don't only spray chemicals, we also spray nutrients. So
right.
On the we feed fertilizers in through the soil every year too, like a granular fertilizer, but a lot of you get quicker action through foliar fertilizers. Okay. So you need a healthy tree the whole way through the season, because there's so many things affecting the next year. So we mentioned the fungus like scabs, and we mentioned insects. Another pest that's a problem is mites.
Okay.
And so they feed on the leaves. And, the leaf will turn all bronze or whatever. But then that really affects the health of the tree, and so it affects the growth of your fruit, because the leaf can't take in all those nutrients that the sun wants to feed it. And
right.
And so mites is another thing that you have to. Usually it's just a one time a year thing if you get it right. A miticide that keeps those mites from feeding on the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another challenge. Another thing that we do is the herbicide. So like in the tree row, we don't want grass and weeds and growing there, because they compete with the roots of the tree and they steal a bunch of those nutrients in the ground from the tree that we want going into the tree. And so we'll do a herb spray to try and keep the
I always thought that was just to make it look nicer, but they're taking key nutrients away from the tree if they're left there.
That's right. And they some of them can be a real pain too, because they grow right up into the tree.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually noticing that when I was spraying a couple days ago, that there's a few like trees that have vines that look like they've completely taken over the tree, and it doesn't seem like it's really good for the health of the tree.
Yeah, no, you don't want that.
So you we talked a little bit about thinning. Obviously, like you talked about how it's important for the health of the tree, or for the production of the tree the next year because of the buds, but it's really important in getting the size of the fruit to be large enough for sale as well, right?
Right. So you kind of know what you want, what a tree can produce, like approximately a bushel. And so you can get a bushel of 130 small apples,
right,
or 75 big apples, and it's the same bushel, but those 75 big apples are a lot more valuable than the 130 small ones.
Right.
I mean, if they're too small, they don't even meet size for grade, but But then there's also like a lot of the small ones will go in a bag, which is a lower end, lower pricing than the large fruit that gets sold by the pound.
Right.
So a lot of time you're trying for, you don't want too big, but most of the time there's some varieties that tend to be large. Honeycrisp is
Okay.
one that you can get too big, but most of the varieties that we deal with, Gala, Ambrosia, the struggle is to get them to the size that you want. That's for maximum potential for return.
Mm-hmm. So, anything else that you're doing throughout there that's really key throughout the year before you get to harvest then?
So, well, one thing that generally happens in the summer that I had mentioned is happening right now is the trellis building. Doesn't really have anything to do with this particular
Right.
crop, except there's maybe a little bit of tying, like so, new growth on trees or whatever that, they've grown taller, they're getting closer to the top of the wire. They need to be tied again up at the top. But another thing that does happen, so this isn't as much in the trellis like we're growing now as in the old style, but we used to do quite a bit of summer pruning
Right. Yeah.
on some varieties, just a few weeks before harvest. And that's because some of them have really produced a bunch of suckers again and the top of the tree, and they're really blocking light.
Oh, okay.
And so if you cut those suckers off, and the light can penetrate the fruit a lot better.
So, are you actually cutting off branches that are holding fruit when you're doing that?
Very little. It's
Okay, they're mostly
it's
just
mostly
growth.
just suckers.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, and that's called summer pruning. And if we're caught up on everything else, then we'll usually do a little bit of that just for better light penetration before harvest. And it saves a little bit of cutting the next spring then. Like it's
you're
kind of
getting
giving
ahead,
you a
yeah.
head start
Yeah.
on next spring's pruning if you do some summer pruning. So that's kind of just usually is what you have time for. Another project that happens every time just before harvest is sanitizing all the bins, the containers that we pick the fruit into.
Oh, okay.
So we'll sanitize all of them and haul them out to the orchard.
Mm-hmm. To get them ready to harvest. Mhm. And so harvest lasts for how many months?
Well, there's a few varieties that get harvested in August,
Mm-hmm.
but the main harvest doesn't start until early September. And then once those varieties, which like the August varieties are not for storage. Like they will only keep a month or two.
Right. Yeah.
But then the varieties that we start harvesting in September, like Mac and Gala and Honeycrisp, are the first 3 in September. Then those varieties you can basically put into storage, long-term storage, and keep all winter. They have that potential, so they're
Right.
like winter varieties. I mean, they can store well.
Yeah. What's the most stressful part of the season?
I think that thinning is the most stressful part, because you have such a short window, and it's so crucial. And if you over thin, you feel so bad that you knocked off all that potential good fruit.
Right.
And if you under thin, you create a lot of extra work and lower return for your fruit, because it's a lot of extra work to do the hand thinning, but it's also a lot of extra work in harvest. Like if you think about how much longer it takes to pick a bin that has 3,000 apples in it versus 1,800 apples.
Yeah. And your hand has to do twice the work, because I mean, you can only pick one.
Right.
Well, maybe more than one, but you still have to touch every apple, so it's going to take that much longer. Yeah, I never thought about that before. And then you're affecting next year, like you said too, with if you don't thin hard enough, right?
Right.
If you're stressing the tree too much, yeah.
So we keep very, very specific records for our thinning of the rates we used and the dates we did it. But then the weather can still affect it so much. Like the thinner works better if it's really warm. And, and
like you said,
not as good. It's so then sometimes you maybe had some stress, maybe you had some frost, a little bit of frost damage, and you're not really sure how much that affected the health of those fruit buds. And so because of that, they thin a little bit easier. And there's just so many. So you just, and you can't see the full effects of the thinning until a few weeks after. And I probably, you probably should just stay out of the orchard for 3 weeks after. but I'm in there just days after trying to figure out if it did what it's supposed to.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that's such a crucial part of it, and it's always scary. But the more you do of it, and the more you see the results, and it's pretty consistent. And if you keep good records and careful with how you do it, and then it seems like it works quite well.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I would not have guessed that, and I don't think I would have picked that out as what your answer would be, but that's really interesting to hear. What's the most enjoyable part of the season?
Oh, harvest is definitely the most enjoyable part.
That one I guessed correctly. That's what I was guessing in my head.
But that harvest can be very stressful too, because there's so many things, getting the timing right. and if you have depending on the weather, if you get a real hot spell or whatever, then you can all of a sudden have a whole bunch of fruit ripe at the same time, and it's
do you start losing
if they start dropping on you, then that's stressful.
Yeah.
But no, so if you have a good crop, then harvest is definitely the most enjoyable part of the season.
Seeing all that hard work pay off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We've probably mentioned some of them, but can you just list a few of the hazards that you have to worry about throughout a year? Maybe some of the ones that we haven't talked about so far specifically.
Yeah, so we've kind of covered the hazard of pests and disease.
Yeah.
That's certainly a big one for apples. But then besides that, frost is a huge one. Frost during bloom or even just before the blossom stage can do a lot of damage.
Right.
So they're the most susceptible right just at the pink stage. That, like, the pink stage is just before the flower totally opens. Like, it looks pink.
It looks pink. Okay.
You can see the flower already, but it's not open yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pink stage. Then when it's open, those are the two times where they're the most susceptible. And so we always like if it tends to be a late spring, because there's less chance of frost during bloom. And this year was a good example. In early May, at a stage where sometimes we're already into bloom. We had a really cold spell where
Right. Yeah.
we had hard frost 7 out of 10 nights.
But it was all
And
before that
it was
the
all
key
before
stage.
the flowers were open. Like we were still at what most of them were still at the tight cluster stage. Up in Waterloo, we were even not even quite at tight cluster stage, and so they were able to take much colder temperatures than they would have at the flowering stage.
Okay.
But we do so. One of the things that we've been doing in our high density orchards is we've been putting in frost fans, which help to in those frost situations. So like on a morning, a lot of times you had that coldest temperature is just before the sun rises on a clear morning.
Okay.
And if it's clear and still, that's when you get the frost, and especially in the low areas. Where these fans that we put in, they rotate and they cover like a 10 to 15 acre segment.
Okay.
And they do two things. They keep the air moving, so they're blowing. So like every minute or so, all those leaves get a real wind, and so frost can't settle on
Okay.
those flowers or those leaves because of the movement. So like on a windy morning, you don't have frost settle in because the air keeps moving.
So it's actually the frost, like the water vapor freezing on the leaf that, or on the bud or whatever, that causes the issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, it's the cold temperature, because one of the ways we use this wind as I'm talking to protect. So the other thing it does is you can actually change the temperature by a degree or two, because the warmer air rises 10, 12 feet in the air, and these fans suck that warmer air back down.
To keep it circulating.
So it's mixing that air, and so you can actually change. Like when we start these fans up, you sometimes see a change of a degree or two in the first half hour, so that you started them.
The air movement and the temperature change can help to protect from the frost. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just 1 degree can make a huge difference.
Okay. Yeah.
When you're right at that freezing temperature.
Is it right at freezing? Like if it went down to -1, is that where it will freeze out the apple tree or like the crop for that year?
Well, no, I mean, -1 will do some damage, and then -2 will do significant more amount of damage, and -3 will, they kind of have, there's a model that you can look at that what they say. If it's at this stage, you're at the blossom stage and you get -2, then you can expect this percentage of the fruit to have been frozen out.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So another way to protect fruit is by overhead irrigation, but you really need a large water supply, because you have to keep the water. You have to keep the water running the whole time during the cold segment.
Like it has to be constantly hitting the tree, or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you stop the water, if you run out of water,
freeze,
and then it'll freeze on there. But like it actually builds up ice around that blossom, but that just works like insulation. It's
really? Okay.
It's that little segment in the middle there. That's that key part. You can, in about a day after you have frost, then you can pinch the back of the buds and you can see if it's black in there, then you know it was frozen.
Okay.
So frost is a big one. And another, between frost and hail are the two biggest dangers that we have in the apple industry. So hail is something that you never know when you get it. So a lot of the best protection against hail is hail netting, but it's very, very expensive to install, and you have to put it up every year. But it's covering right over top of the trees.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have the trellis system in place, like the posts, and so like we've been the last number of years we've been putting posts tall enough so that we could put this hail netting on top and still be able to get underneath with our tractors and sprayers and stuff. But so far we haven't done that. I mean, it's more one of the things with hail is it tends to be spotty. And so if your orchards are in a bunch of different locations, at least it's less likely that all of your locations will get hit.
You usually won't get a hailstorm that hits a large enough area to cover all of your orchards. Yeah.
Right. But it could. I mean, it's
okay.
There's no guarantee. So I mean, that's always a worry every year. Every time one of those thunderstorms come up in a time when it's really hot and humid, and then you get a thunderstorm right after that. That's prime hailstorm time, and so we have a hail cannon, it's called, here in Waterloo, that we've had for probably 20 years. And there's a few guys that I've heard that claim that it really works, but it's really, really hard to tell whether it works because you have to have it fired up a few minutes before the hailstorm actually hits, and it's so hard to determine that exactly. And a lot of times hailstorms really come with a strong wind, and the way these explosions work, it sends up a ring of
is it just like a sound wave?
It's a sound wave, but it's actually
Circular
moving air.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's supposed to hail forms on a dust particle in the cloud. And so the idea of this would be that it actually keeps the hail from forming on the dust particle because you're sending up these wind currents that keep stirring it up in there in the cloud to keep the hail from forming on the dust particle.
So, yeah.
So in theory, it might work, but to actually get it to work right on top of, if it's in a real strong wind, maybe it works. Maybe it works for the neighbor 2 miles down the road.
And don't, I was just going to say, because don't hail like do a bunch of up and down motions? Like, don't they have to go way up to freeze and then come back down and then get sent way up to freeze again? Like, it seems like you'd have to get them right when they're starting to form so that they don't get that ice at all.
That's right. You have to get them right. But you're the scientist. You know a lot more about that than I do. So.
Yeah, I'm just as you're describing it, I'm like, I wonder if, because storm clouds move too. So it seems like you'd maybe be stopping it from forming for a cloud that would have dropped its hail like 10 miles away or something like that. Would be my initial thought for it. But because usually they're moving really fast, like those clouds, right? They don't just stay in one spot and.
Yeah.
Oh, they do. Maybe they do that too. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. But maybe it probably would get a lot larger as it goes up to that moving air that it's sending up, right?
Right. Maybe because it's going out of a funnel, so it's it's supposed to. This one that we have is supposed to cover like 100 or 150 acre.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Segment, but whether it's right on top of you, then by the time it gets up there, I don't know.
Have you ever used it and then gotten hail?
The only times we've had hail since on our orchard here in Waterloo is times when it came at a weird time in the middle of the night or something, and but so it's protected us many times. We just don't know if we actually would have got any hail.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun to play with and think that there's maybe something that we're doing, because it's a helpless feeling when you get hit with hail.
Leafs gives you something to do while you're.
But we're not convinced enough of it that we haven't gone and invested in a whole bunch more of them and put them in our Vienna orchards down there. But
yeah, I guess with hail netting too, you kind of have to decide, is the risk great enough to make the cost worthwhile, because you don't get hit with hail every year, right?
Right.
So it's not a guarantee. So you're maybe protecting yourself for nothing.
And that's why we have orchards in different locations, plus all our growers, and so it's almost a given every year that some of our growers are gonna get hit with some hail, and it can really vary too, as the extent of the damage of the hail. Like, you can get a bad hailstorm where it's a total wipeout and there's no apples left for fresh, but sometimes it's it's pretty small and pretty spotty, and it didn't even break the skin, so it just kind of left an indented there, and it's still a perfect apple to eat, even though it doesn't meet the fresh. It's still fine to use for the processing, like for apple chips.
Okay, yeah.
And so it's not a total loss. It's still an apple that you can use. It just doesn't look as nice.
Will hail do enough damage that you can't even process an apple?
Oh yeah, if it's big hail, it'll destroy it so bad that it probably won't even stay on the tree until harvest, because it'll start rotting there and it'll fall off.
Have you had hail that bad?
I've never seen hail that bad on one of our farms, but I've seen it on other farms, and I've heard lots of hailstorms like that. But
yeah,
most of the ones we get tend to be kind of just smaller hail, and for 30 seconds to a minute. But in a minute of hail, you can sometimes have 80-90% of the fruit that gets hit.
Yeah. Is it a once in a 10-year approximately that a certain orchard will get hail, or? I've
heard that said, but then I've seen it a couple of years in a row, and
I know, but like over an average, would it? Can you guess at about?
It seems like some areas in Ontario are a little bit more susceptible than others, but
well, that would make sense. Like, there's areas that are more susceptible to certain kinds of weather, so I would suspect that could be somewhat predicted or charted out.
I think, like on one particular orchard, every 10 years might be fair, but sometimes it seems like it's got to be more often than that. But
yeah. What about frost? Is that more often than 1 in 10 years? That you'll have significant enough damage that you'd say like 80 or 90% of the crop gets wiped out?
Well, no, 80 to 90% of the crop wiped out. That's not more often than 10 years. Like,
really? Okay.
We had in 2012. We had 90% of our crop wiped out, but that was once in a 50 year. Like, that was the year we had two really warm weeks in March, and we had most of that damage was already done then end of March, like
Okay, because it got cold again.
Where normal, like in this year, we had frost in May, and it didn't do damage because they weren't far enough yet.
So the problem that year was the 2 weeks of early, basically summer weather in March.
That's right.
Yeah,
and that was just very unusual.
Yeah,
but that was, that's the only year in my lifetime so far that I've seen that was just a outlier. But then a frost where you get maybe 50% wiped out, or see that part of it is that it's the timing, and so the varieties are a little bit different, and
okay.
so when that frost hits, it might have hit one variety really
Gotcha,
hard
yeah.
and another variety not quite as hard because it was already past the most crucial stage. It wasn't quite to the most crucial stage, and but and these frost fans, I think, reduce the risk a lot too of the frost damage. They mitigate the frost damage. So in a year when you might have had 50% frost damage without the frost fans, maybe you only have 20 or 30%.
Well, that makes a huge difference then for just those devices out in the field. That's great. We've kind of been talking about how things have changed since you started growing apples 40 years ago or whenever it was. Do you have any predictions or ideas of of what it's going to look like in 20 years from now? Or like, do suppliers and things like that try to sell you on new ideas and new technologies for growing apples, or are things fairly the same from year to year?
Oh, no, there's always new things out there. One thing that we demoed in our orchard a couple of years ago was a platform that for harvesting fruit. So it was a platform with conveyors and everything that you just pick the apple, put it on the conveyor, and it carries it to the bin underneath. And
instead of the buckets that you wear on your
right
on you to put the apples into, yeah.
And I really liked that platform. So then you have people at different heights, and so you don't need the ladders. And
okay, yep. Is it safer for an orchard worker with a platform like that?
Yeah, I would say it's safer, but and so there's quite a few like those are being used quite regularly in some, and so if I had a small orchard operation with 30 to 50 acres, and I could do most of the I could put 5 people on that platform and do most of my harvest with that one platform. It would seem like it would make a lot of sense in our operation, because it's working in another system. So if I get 2 platforms, well, that's 10 guys can pick on there, and you kind of, that's another thing to manage. It's we've talked about purchasing a couple and seeing if we like them, but so far we haven't. There's a little bit of labor savings, right? If the trees are loaded right, like equally, like if you have equal load on the bottom and top, and so that everybody, like the problem is if you don't have equal load, or if you have the odd tree missing, or if it's too light on the bottom or too light on the top some places, then that guy has nothing to do for a little bit because there's no apples right in front of him, and so then you lose some of that efficiency. So if you have a really good consistent orchard that's really uniform, that's where platforms work the best.
Well, wouldn't the trellis that you use now kind of help with being a more consistent fruit, or did you not even find that?
Yes, but there's also the thing of, like, most of the varieties we can't pick the whole thing at once.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You might be able to pick 70% of the first pick, and then there's another 30% of the second pick or whatever, and so you have that aspect too. And so I have I have a friend over in Italy that was really like it's his machine that we demoed, and he's been working very hard to sell me this platform. And I'm not saying that we won't in the future. There's a good chance that we will at some point, but I really need 15 of them, like, because that would be, if I had enough to do most of my harvest with that. And so then we all switched to the platform thinking rather than the but
So you think
they're expensive piece of equipment, and so
you're thinking it's an all or nothing. You couldn't run some crews with the traditional way of picking and some with
you could, but then it's another new thing to manage, and you really have to stay on top of that and make sure that they're managed properly and actually get the efficiency out of it. Because if they're not managed properly, then you're not getting the efficiency out, and then you're spending all that money and not even gaining that labor efficiency.
Yeah,
and we have a pretty efficient. Our guys are really good pickers, and we have systems that work really well, and we measure how many bins we get per man, and I've compared that to what the bins I can get per man with this machine, and it's not a huge difference there. Like, there's not much room for.
But are you remembering that if you used it for a few years, then your pickers would increase their efficiency on the machine probably? Like, just with a demo, they probably didn't have time to learn the best ways to use it. Right?
Yeah, there's things like that I'm sure they'd improve a little bit. But I'm talking about people that have used them and
I see. Okay.
And how many bins per man that they say they can get versus how many bins per man I get the way I'm doing it.
Is it really worth it? Yeah.
And so it's certainly not something that I'm writing off. So the other, like, another step past that is the robot picking. Like, there's a few companies that are working on robot machines, and guys that are actually growing and training their orchard. Like, for a robot to work, you really have to have, pretty precise pruning, and you need like the super spindle, where there's not much branching out or whatever. Yep. And so some guys are actually really trying hard to grow orchard that they think could work for robot because of how expensive it's getting to pay guys for hand picking.
So this is like totally autonomous as far as like it picks the apple itself?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like, it'll drive down the row itself and pick them, or does someone have to drive it?
I would think they would have someone watching it.
Oh yeah. Have you seen one work ever?
Just on video. Okay. I've never seen them.
Like, do they have arms that reach out and?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And the one is a vacuum system, like it sucks them.
Oh.
But the problem with that is varieties that come off the stem really hard, like you get so much stem and leaf with it there, or else you rip out the stem.
Yeah.
And
they haven't figured out that little lift technique. Yeah.
Right. And that's it's really amazing what our fingers all do, like to try and make like when you go out there and physically pick an apple, and that twist that you have to give it to make it come off really nice. Well, that's hard to get a machine with fingers to do that. But that's the other, like, there's a company in Israel that's been working really hard at a finger robot machine.
Okay. Well,
but when you look at the price of those, and so one of the advantages that they say is they put lights on, and you can keep the robot going all night too. Like,
I see. Yeah.
The robot doesn't mind if he has to work overtime.
Yeah, exactly.
And he can pick at night, but even if you had that machine going day and night, like a robot like that, from what I see of at the very best, it's only doing maybe 5 or 6 good pickers can do.
Okay.
And so,
so it's not,
and so,
not way
so
faster.
if I need 150 pickers to harvest my crop, and you divide that by 5, how many robots would I need? And that,
a lot.
Are
they a million or a few million? Or
I don't know. I don't even know what they are, but even if they're 500,000 per thing, it's. I think we're a little way from.
Yeah.
I think the platform is, to me, that's a possibility. The robot for me is still, it's not something that we're really planning for at this point.
Yeah. Well, if the economics keep pushing in that direction, that it's not possible to find the labor. It's amazing what you're able to start justifying, and then usually costs come down too with technology as it gets used and developed and improved. So maybe in 30 years it might be all robots out there picking apples. Who knows? Yeah. But
it's a really big challenge because of how easily apples bruise.
Right. Yes.
And the unique movement that it takes to lift it and twist it off.
Are there other fruits that the harvesting has become a lot more automated than apples, or is that an issue with any fruit?
I think citrus is much easier to pick with a robot than.
Gotcha. And anything that's being processed, you can just be harder on the fruit than for fresh selling as well. So it's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has been great. We are getting fairly long here. We're almost at 2.5 hours of recording, so we might knock off a few things that I had on the list here. Exactly. Just in a couple minutes, do you have any advice for those that are maybe interested in having a small orchard on their own, or maybe interested in getting into growing apples? Is there anything that they should for sure know when they're starting out, or as they get into growing fruit?
Well, when I saw this question, my wife right away said that you'll say don't. For a few trees in the backyard, it's just, I guess it depends what your expectations are.
Uh-huh.
But if you're fine with fruit that isn't premium, like if you don't mind if it has some defects, or
if it's wormy,
or whatever, that's fine. It's nice to. People have dreams of going out to their backyard and picking the fruit, but some of the challenges are because apples have so many pests,
mm-hmm.
and you can't actually, the regular person can't actually get the chemicals and tools that they need for spraying their trees.
Right.
And because you could, if you're committed enough to go and do the pesticide safety course, so that you have a license so that you can buy those chemicals. But
can you buy them on a small scale?
But then that's the other thing. Not small enough for what they need. It's going to last you for quite a few years if you just have two. You get a little bottle of something or whatever, and there's so many different things. But if you just want to get them good enough, like you can hit them. You
could do a few sprays,
a few basic things, and you might get a reasonably edible apple.
Uh-huh.
And so. More power to you if you wanna go ahead and try it.
But it's a lot harder than having a garden and growing a few vegetables is what you're saying.
Oh, much harder.
Yeah.
And I mean, we didn't even talk about like mice and rabbits and deer that like to
Oh yeah, true.
eat fruit trees and
Yeah.
yeah, there's every. I mean, it just seems like there's so many things for apple trees in particular. I mean, that's what I'm familiar with. Some other fruit trees maybe are a little easier.
Okay.
Cherries, I think, is it's a little easier
Okay.
to do a cherry tree in your yard than an apple tree. But it depends. Like if you really like gardening and you really like paying attention to your tree, and there's probably a lot that you can learn and do for protecting that tree, and even through some organic practices or whatever.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's like even some of the maybe garden pesticides that you can get. I don't know if some of those could translate into a really small tree or something like that, like just to help. Like, I mean, stuff that's sold
like
at a
some of
hardware
those
store or something.
some of those things will do a little bit something, but I'm just saying, don't expect to like the quality of apple that you see in the grocery store.
Right.
It might be a little challenging for you to get that kind of quality in your backyard tree, unless you're really paying a lot of attention to it.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I mean, I remember working at market, and we'd get all kinds of questions about what to do with this tree that they have in their backyard and things like that. So it's maybe good for people to hear that it's really challenging, and if you're up to the challenge, then great. But to know that's good to hear. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up pretty soon here. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about yet, or had planned to say that you really want to say yet, or something that you'd like to promote before we wrap up this recording?
Well, I'll promote ambrosia apples. That's definitely my favorite. We didn't talk about new varieties at all, but
right, yeah.
Ambrosia's was actually discovered in Canada. It was one of these rare ones that kind of, it grew wild, and the guy just discovered it in his orchard, and then he recognized it. I mean, he ate it, recognized it as having good potential, and that was discovered out in BC.
Okay.
And so it's becoming one of the popular apples. I think there's still a lot of people that don't know about it. It's a sweet apple, so if you like a sweet apple, it's really hard to beat ambrosia, and
it's better than Gala, right?
It's better than Gala, in my opinion, yeah. And it's just by far my favorite, and I have 2 ambrosia apples every day for my lunch.
Okay.
Down in Vienna, I don't have to carry a lunch that way, and it just makes a perfect lunch, and I highly promote. Well, apple a day keeps the doctor away, but I think 2 does even better job. So yeah, eat lots of apples. And then also I'd like to promote our apple chips. That is a fairly new thing for Martin's, but really good healthy snack. It's just dried apples, but we dry them crisp enough that
they're more similar to potato chip in texture than a dried. Than your home dried apple or something,
right?
Something like that, yeah.
And so yeah, that's a fairly new product for us yet, but
yeah. Are the ambrosias available other places than Canada? Like, are they grown in the United States at all, or other countries?
Yes, they are grown in the U.S. now as well. There's quite a few growing in Washington now.
Okay,
but
yeah.
You're starting to see more of them in the U.S. But
are they in supermarkets all year round now? Are there enough of them?
So we had enough of them that we were packing them up until last week, I think.
Okay.
And this year, so that's the longest that we've ever gone with them.
So there's just a few months
they've been available in Costco from early October or middle October, I guess, probably is when they would have started carrying them. The harvest time for ambrosia is early to middle October.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we've just run out now.
Nice. Yeah. And do you keep planting more of them, or a lot of your new plantings ambrosia?
Yeah, our new plantings are largely ambrosia, Honeycrisp, and Gala.
Okay.
And Crimson Crisp is another one that it's been around for a little bit, but it never really caught on until just recently. We've gotten it into the supermarkets, and now we've started having more requests for them. So that's another one that we're planting some. And there's always new varieties on the horizon that we're working with. There's potentially one that we're gonna plant a sample of in the next year or so here. That just kind of a trial to see if it has potential for being a commercial variety.
Okay.
But there's two things for commercial varieties. It's got to be a good variety, but then you actually have to get it marketed. Like sometimes a good variety dies because it just never got marketed. People didn't find out about it.
Right. Yeah.
And then
there's no market. Yeah.
And if there's no market, the price is too low, and then
no one
people
grows
give up on it,
so no one hears about it. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. All right. So go look for an ambrosia apple the next time you're buying apples. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this and answering my questions. And I thought it was just going to be like me asking you questions so that listeners would learn about it, but I learned a lot from that I didn't know before from the conversation here too. So
okay, great.
That was very enjoyable.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, it went fast. I didn't expect.
Yeah, you told me that you weren't sure that you could come up with enough for 2 hours, and we're at 2 hours and 36 minutes, and I had to cut short a bunch of stuff, so I think we could have gone on probably a lot longer. But it makes sense. We've talked a lot about these kinds of things in the past too. So okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Dad, for sharing your knowledge with us. This was a really fun conversation for me. I grew up on the farm as well and spent many summers working in the apple operation. So I was expecting to kind of guide this conversation and not learn a whole lot from it. But I was pleasantly surprised by the many new things that I learned in the conversation that we had. So thanks again, Dad, for sharing your knowledge with us. If you would like to connect with the show, you can send me an email at contact@everydayexpertise.ca, or you can connect on social media. You can also find show notes and other information about the show on the website. That's at everydayexpertise.ca. That's all for now. Join me again next week to learn from the expertise of everyday people.